It's 9 p.m. here in the French capital. You're watching live from Paris on France 24. I'm Tom Burgess-Watson, and these are the top stories. President Trump announces on Twitter that Morocco has become the fourth Arab state since August to commit to establishing diplomatic relations with Israel. The battle is far from being won. Those are the words of the French Prime Minister regarding the COVID-19 situation here in France. He says that the plans for easing the lockdown are going to have to be changed. And EU leaders gather for a two-day summit in Brussels. They say that they have managed to resolve a dispute with Hungary and Poland, meaning that the bloc's budget has been salvaged. Good evening. We begin with news still coming into us here at France 24. It's been confirmed by both Morocco and Israel that the two countries are going to resume diplomatic relations. It's been reported that this announcement followed a telephone call between the US President Donald Trump and the Moroccan King, Mohammed VI. Well, after the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Sudan, Morocco is the fourth Arab state since August to commit to establishing diplomatic relations with Israel. Well, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the agreement historic. France 24's Brian Quinn has this report for us.
Another diplomatic breakthrough in the Middle East. Thursday saw Morocco confirm that it would resume official relations with Israel for the first time in 2 decades, a development hailed by the Israeli Prime Minister.
I've always believed that this historic day would come. I've always worked for it. The light of peace on this Hanukkah day has never shone brighter than today in the Middle East.
The announcement came on the heels of a phone call between Morocco's King Mohammed VI and Donald Trump, one that secured a long-sought territorial goal for the kingdom, U.S. recognition of Morocco's claim over the territory of Western Sahara. It's a controversial decision. The kingdom has been fighting an Algerian-backed independence movement there since the mid-1970s. Thursday's announcement is part of a broad push by Trump to reshape relations in the Middle East. This past summer, U.S. brokered deals saw the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain normalize their relations with Tel Aviv, the first Arab states to do so since 1994. Sudan has also announced its intention to follow suit. The shelving of decades-old enmities is intended in part to confront the Sunni Arab states and the Jewish state's common enemy, Shiite regional rival, the Republic of Iran. Left out in the shifting geopolitical realities, though, are the Palestinians, whose struggle for statehood long motivated their Arab neighbors to reject Israel. King Mohammed, however, insists that his government remains committed to a two-state solution.
Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to John Linden, who's the Executive Director at the Alliance for Middle East Peace. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. This is something of a diplomatic coup for the United States, for Israel, for Morocco, but certainly not for the Palestinians. But overall, is this a positive development, in your opinion?
It's difficult to be completely sort of black and white about it. I think, look, Morocco and Israel, because of Morocco's status as a country that is incredibly important for the Jewish presence in the Middle East and North Africa, them normalizing relations is a good thing, and particularly coming on the first night of Hanukkah, you can see the importance and the significance from an Israeli and a sort of Jewish peoplehood perspective. However, I think it's difficult not to be cynical about the transactional nature in which this deal seems to have come about in the lame duck period of Donald Trump's presidency, and with the sort of transactional recognition of the Moroccan occupation in Western Sahara. There is a little bit more going on here than simply a recognition of Israel and a sort of a reconciliation between Morocco and Israel, which, it must be remembered, did have far more normalized relations in the early 1990s than is the case between Israel and most other countries in the Arab world.
Absolutely. We're going to talk a bit more about Western Sahara in just a moment, but just in terms of what this changes and the conversation, how it gets shaped or not by this announcement today. I mean, one could argue that, it's been 72 years since the State of Israel was founded. The Palestinian issue has been there for most of that time, and nothing has really worked up until this point in terms of resolving that issue. Perhaps people could argue that actually by bringing all these people to the table, they will perhaps join the conversation, and that might actually work to the advantage of the Palestinians. Do you think that's wishful thinking?
It's too soon to tell. I hope it's the case. I think an entrepreneurial approach by the Palestinian Authority could yet make it the case. It's really clear now, with the fourth country to normalize relations with Israel only since August, that the normalization train, for want of a better phrase, has left the station. And there is there's an onus now in the Palestinians to try and find a way to use it to their advantage. And I think up until now, the posture of trying to ignore or delegitimize or push back against this trend hasn't really succeeded. But an opportunity perhaps exists in the incoming Biden administration next year. The skepticism and frustration with the Palestinians is that normalization seems to have in no way been linked to progress toward a two-state solution or an end to occupation. Perhaps with Joe Biden's presidency, there's a chance to take this drive of normalization and begin to redirect it toward an ending of the actual conflict that exists in the Middle East, which is between Israelis and Palestinians, not between Israelis and Moroccans. I just hope the Palestinian leadership can recognize that, because it is clear from things that the Biden transition team have been saying that they do welcome this trend more broadly. The question now is whether it can be turned into a bridge rather than a bypass road, which is what I think forces on the Israeli right would like it to be, saying that we can have peace without having to give an inch, essentially, on the Palestinian question.
Yeah, and as you say, this is an initiative announced in the dying days of the Trump administration and the Jared Kushner administration, who's obviously been doing a lot of the work behind the scenes. So you don't see this as being a trap in a way, or a complicated chalice for the Biden administration to then pick up in 5 or 6 weeks from now?
I think this particular deal is quite difficult because it accompanies, as I mentioned, the Western Sahara question, where the inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by force is a long-held norm in international law and in the sort of rules-based order. And the challenge for the Biden administration, to be candid, will be to try and keep this recognition, this normalization, whilst perhaps rolling that back. I think it's going to be very difficult if you look at other conflicts with a territorial basis, whether it's Crimea and Ukraine, or again, the West Bank and Gaza. There is a dangerous norm there, I think, that if the Biden administration leaves it unaddressed, could open up other issues elsewhere. But I think creative diplomacy could take the energy around this normalization and begin to redirect it. The Israeli population are beginning to get a sense now of what may happen if the region opens up to them. Up until now, since August, that has been cost-free from an Israeli perspective. Now, the US taxpayer has paid a little bit, whether it's with military aid and sort of international norms have paid, as I mentioned, with regards to Sudan coming off the anti-terror list, or this situation with Western Sahara. The question is whether, if Israelis are confronted by an American president who says, I can bring more of this, I can bring the entire Arab world into recognition with Israel, but there's a price, and that price is going to be meaningful progress towards a two-state solution. That proposition remains untested. President Obama, in his presidency, he tried to link a gradual improvement with Saudi Arabia, for example, in 2014, with progress toward a two-state solution, and interestingly was pushed back from the Saudis. Whether President Biden-elect will be able to rekindle that, taking some of the momentum that President Trump, to his credit, has created, is yet to be seen. But it is the first time, I think, an incoming president has a new, potentially positive dynamic to play with on this issue. And if you look around, there isn't an awful lot of momentum and positivity or dynamism on other parts of conflict resolution between Israelis and Palestinians.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us, though. John Linden, Executive Director of the Alliance for Middle East Peace. Thank you so much. The French health authorities have announced the latest COVID-19 numbers. There have been 13,750 new cases in the last 24 hours. And there have been, which is rather better than the figure that was announced on Wednesday, which was 14,595. Well, the French Prime Minister Jean Castex announced today that the 6-week-long coronavirus lockdown is going to be lifted on the 15th of December. However, an 8 p.m. curfew is going to be imposed, and that's also going to apply for New Year's Eve. Well, the Prime Minister said that families will be allowed to travel to celebrate Christmas together, but that museums, theatres, cinemas are all going to have to stay closed for an extra 3 weeks. That, the Prime Minister said, is because the number of new COVID-19 infections is still stubbornly high. And he said that the battle is far from being won.
Nous sommes sur une sorte de plateau.
We have reached a plateau. The number of infections is no longer falling. In fact, it has been going up slightly for the last few days.
Nous ne serons pas le 15 décembre.
We won't have reached our goal of under 5,000 daily infections by the 15th of December.
Comme nous l'avions annoncé,
As announced, we will still move to a new phase, but the rules will be stricter than we'd originally planned.
The French Prime Minister Jean Castex speaking there. Meanwhile, the French health authorities say they expect the number of people seeking COVID-19 tests to increase significantly in the lead up to Christmas. According to one survey, 1 in 4 people intend to get tested before they go and visit their families for the holidays. France 24's Sharon Gaffney has more.
Back-to-back antigen tests are being carried out by nurses at this temporary clinic in a town hall in the south of France.
J'ai quand même mes filles qui vont venir me rendre visite à Noël. Alors donc, quand même, il ne faudrait pas que je l'ai attrapé, que je le leur donne.
This woman had her result within 20 minutes.
Négatif. Je suis ravie.
There was also good news for this patient who says she'll be retested before the holidays if necessary.
Nous allons nous faire retester avant Noël. Je le dirai à mon mari. On viendra avec mon mari et on en parlera à notre fille et notre petit-fils. Il n'y a aucun souci. Il faut se contrôler régulièrement.
More than 1 in 4 people in France plan to get tested for COVID-19 before Christmas, so pharmacists are stocking up on testing kits.
Depuis le début de la semaine, où on nous dit est-ce qu'on pourra venir le 24 à 5, 6. Donc c'est au moins la 3e fois qu'on me demande depuis ce matin. Donc je m'attends à ce qu'on m'appelle encore plus pour prendre rendez-vous pour le 24, même si c'est sans rendez-vous, les gens veulent être rassurés.
Rapid antigen tests are less reliable than the more commonly used PCR tests. The most accurate results are provided by labs, but the waiting times are longer.
On aura peut-être du mal à répondre à cette demande qui va être importante sur un temps réduit, puisqu'on envisage que ça soit, en tout cas c'est ce qui est demandé par l'ARS, sur les jours précédents Noël ou sur les jours précédents le 1er janvier.
In a bid to meet that demand, the number of staff working in labs like this one will be doubled over the holiday period.
Now, the American health authorities did warn that there would be a spike in COVID-19 deaths after millions of people ignored warnings and travelled all around the country for the Thanksgiving holiday last month. Well, that spike has now arrived. More than 3,000 COVID-19 deaths have been reported in the last 24 hours. That's the highest daily toll since April. France 24's Solange Mougin has this report for us.
Hospitals filled to the max. Parking lots turned into extra wings to treat COVID patients. Like many others across the country, this medical center in Apple Valley, California, is running out of space, and staff is stretched dangerously thin.
I know today that we have 60 patients holding in our emergency department that are waiting for beds inside the hospital. Some of them have been there as long as 7 days.
Some 10 counties across the state no longer have intensive care beds available. In Los Angeles County, officials choked up with emotion, for the 258% surge over the past month is not just a number, but actual loved ones lost.
While this trend line provides a frightening visual of our reality, the more terrible truth is that over 8,000 people, over 8,000 people who were beloved members of their families are not coming back.
For the first time, some 3,200 people passed away from the coronavirus in a single day in the U.S. It is fast approaching the 300,000 mark in total fatalities. Health officials say the full surge from the Thanksgiving holiday has yet to be felt. And with many not social distancing, the virus is proliferating rapidly.
Seeking refuge from the cold, people may be tempted to gather indoors in poorly ventilated areas. Really the perfect conditions for the virus to spread.
American health regulators are expected to authorize a vaccine in the coming days and begin a rollout to the most vulnerable. But authorities say it'll likely be a long, grief-filled winter before the grim surge tampers down.
In other news, leaders of the 27 EU member states are gathered in Brussels for a 2-day summit. They've got a long and complicated agenda, but it seems they've got off to a good start because the EU Council President Charles Michel announced a little earlier on that after overcoming objections from Hungary and Poland, they've agreed on a €1.8 trillion budget and coronavirus recovery package. Well, Poland and Hungary had vetoed that deal because the money came with terms and conditions, notably respect for democratic freedoms. Well, that dispute has now been resolved. France 24's Dave Keating in Brussels explains.
Well, the deal is based around a compromise that was devised by Germany, which right now is holding the rotating EU presidency. The mechanism would have withheld some funds over the long-term budget, the next 7 years, 2021 to 2027, to any country found violating the rule of law. Hungary and Poland, which are already under investigation for violating the rule of law, didn't like that. So what this compromise does, it doesn't touch the mechanism itself, that stays the same, but they've added an explanatory note to the mechanism, which explains how and when it would be used, which stipulates that it wouldn't be used for political purposes, and most importantly, says that the Commission wouldn't trigger it until after Poland and Hungary have exhausted all legal challenges to the law itself. So Poland and Hungary are still not accepting this mechanism. They say it's illegal, essentially, and they're going to take that case to the European Court of Justice. And under this agreement, the European Commission wouldn't instigate any rule of law mechanism case against any country until the European Court of Justice has ruled that this mechanism is legal. That could take 2 or even 3 years. So it buys both countries some time. Many have pointed out that 2 or 3 years takes Viktor Orban's Fidesz party past the next election in Hungary. So I think that both leaders will be able to return to Poland and Hungary claiming victory. Is it much of a victory? The mechanism is still in place, and they still don't like this mechanism, but this does give them the ability to challenge it in court, and in the meantime, in theory, the Commission will not apply it, although lawyers have noted that maybe that this piece of paper is not all that legally sound.
France 24's Dave Keating reporting there from Brussels. Now, the former French President Nicolas Sarkozy and his 2 co-defendants arrived here in Paris at a court on what was the last day of their trial in a landmark corruption scandal. Well, the verdict on that trial is going to be announced on the 1st of March. Well, Sarkozy is accused of offering a plum job to a judge in exchange for information on another legal case relating to him. Well, prosecutors are calling for Sarkozy to be sentenced to prison. The Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan was a guest of honour today at a military parade in Azerbaijan to celebrate the country's retaking control over large parts of Nagorno-Karabakh and the surrounding area. Well, 6 weeks of fierce fighting with Armenian forces came to an end in November, with a peace deal brokered by Russia. Well, Turkey played a key role in that conflict, and the Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev showered the visiting Turkish president with praise, while President Erdogan hailed what he called a glorious victory.
Karabakh is now reunited with its motherland. It happened thanks to you, Azerbaijani soldiers. Congratulations. I kiss the hands of the mothers who raised you and sent you to the front line.
The Turkish president speaking there in Baku. Well, ever since the Russian-brokered peace deal took effect in November, protesters in the Armenian capital have been calling for the resignation of the country's Prime Minister, Nikol Pashinyan. France 24's Yuka Roya has this report for us.
Red cards against Nikol Pashinyan. For these protesters, the Prime Minister is responsible for what they see as Armenia's humiliating loss in its war with Azerbaijan.
Այդքան մարդաս, երեխեքին սպանելա, տվելա փռի, դիակներին չի կարում բերի, գերիները մնացել են դուրսը, այդ հարցերը չի լուծեն, մենակ հողերի ստորագրելա, վրաս հողերն ա տվել։
Pashinyan came under heavy criticism after signing a Russian-brokered peace deal last month that ended 6 weeks of intense fighting in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. The agreement forced Armenia to make concessions, while Russia deployed peacekeeping troops to provide a buffer. Under the pact, Azerbaijan recovered large areas that had been controlled by Armenian forces, seen here in blue, for a quarter of a century. 3 of Armenia's former presidents joined the demand for Pashinyan to step down. Last week, 17 opposition parties gave him an ultimatum to resign by Tuesday. The Prime Minister ignored it, telling Parliament on Wednesday that the nation needed to come together in those difficult times. The war that began in September left more than 5,600 people killed on both sides.
Now, there was high drama in a remote corner of Texas on Wednesday evening when SpaceX launched its brand new Starship rocket. Well, the unmanned test flight went well to begin with, but 6 minutes and 42 seconds later, it came to an end with a fireball and crash landing back on Earth. Well, the SpaceX boss, Elon Musk, played down any talk of failure. He says that his goal of getting people to Mars will be a reality in as little as 6 years from now.
2, 1, 0.
All went well until the last moment. After lifting off from Cameron County in Texas, SpaceX's Starship prototype traveled upwards for a few minutes, flipped sideways and descended as planned, but went up in flame as it touched down. Despite the disastrous ending, Elon Musk was upbeat. Explaining that a lack of fuel tank pressure was to blame, he congratulated his team for the 6 minutes 42 seconds test flight, saying it provided all necessary data. "Mars, here we come," he tweeted. After becoming the first private company to send humans to the International Space Station, Musk's firm aims to use Starship, its next-generation reusable launch vehicle, to take people to the Moon, then to Mars in a few years' time.
Earth-Mars synchronization occurs roughly every 26 months. So we had one this year, the summer, and so that means in roughly about 2 years there'll be another one, and then 2 years after that. So I'd say if you say 6 years from now, I think highly confident. If we get lucky, maybe 4 years.
The complete Starship vehicle, when combined with the super-heavy first-stage booster, will stand 120 meters tall and could carry more than 100 tons of crew and cargo to Earth's orbit. The project received funding from NASA, alongside rivals like Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin, to try and develop affordable space travel. The first tourist scheduled to fly in Starship, Japanese billionaire Yusaku Maezawa, who's training to travel to the Moon in 2023.